The Galactic Conclave had existed for millions of years. It was a great council of 4,000 different species from across the stars. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched young species crawl out of their birth worlds and reach for the heavens. They had kept records of everything, but there was one record they kept separate from all others. They called it the Crimson Archive. It was a collection of warnings about species too dangerous to approach, worlds too deadly to visit, threats too great to ignore. Earth appeared in the Crimson Archive 17 times. The Valkyrie were an ancient race. They had existed for so long that they had forgotten their own beginning. Their bodies were thin and gray, and their minds could touch the fabric of reality itself. They served as the keepers of the archive, and they have been watching humanity for a very long time. Long before humans left their planet, the Valkyrie had sent observers to watch them. What they saw confused and frightened them. Humans were a species of contradictions. They created beautiful music that could make listeners weep with joy. They also built weapons that could burn entire cities to ash. They developed medicines to save lives and poisons to end them. They reached out with love to strangers and turned on their own brothers with hatred. The chief archivist, an old Valkyrie named Thyssen, wrote the first warning about humanity 300 years before first contact. His words were simple but heavy with meaning. They are chaos given flesh, he wrote. They love with the heat of stars and hate with the patience of the void. Their lives are short, barely a century, but do not be fooled. They do not waste a single moment. What takes us 1,000 years to learn, they master in decades. They are not weak. They are compressed. The Conclave listened to these warnings. When humanity first left their solar system, the commandment has been escaped a quarantine zone around Earth. No species was to make contact. No ship was to approach. They would watch and wait and see what kind of species humanity would become. Humanity grew slowly at first. They built colonies on nearby worlds. They learned to bend space and travel between stars. Within 200 years, they controlled 40 planets. Their fleet numbered in the hundreds. They were small compared to the great empires of the galaxy, but they were growing. The Conclave continued to watch. They noted how quickly human technology advanced. Humans had gone from primitive rockets to faster-than-light travel in less than 3 centuries. This was not normal. Most species took thousands of years to make such progress. Humans seemed to run where others walked, but the Conclave was old and patient. They were content to wait and see. The Vraxian Dominion was not patient. The Vraxians were a proud species. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and skin like polished metal. They had conquered 63 star systems in 12,000 years of expansion. They believed they were destined to rule the galaxy. Their leader was High Sovereign Maldois. He had lived for 800 years, kept alive by technology and sheer will. He had never known defeat. He had never retreated from a battle. He looked at the map of the galaxy and saw only territory waiting to be claimed. When his advisors showed him the human territories, he saw an opportunity. 40 worlds, a few hundred ships, a species that had existed among the stars for barely 3 centuries. They would be easy prey. These creatures are nothing, Maldois declared to his war council. The Conclave treats them like some great threat, but look at them. They are tiny. They are weak. They control a handful of rocks while we command an empire. His admiral, a female Vraxian named Serethi, did not share his confidence. She had been assigned to study humanity as part of her diplomatic duties. She had spent years learning their history, watching the recordings, trying to understand how they thought. What she found had given her nightmares. "My sovereign," she said carefully, "I have studied these humans. They are not like us. They are not like any species in the Conclave. Malloys waved a hand dismissively. All species say this about themselves. It means nothing. No, my sovereign. Listen to me. Sarethi stepped forward, her voice urgent. I have seen their history. They fight wars against each other with a brutality that defies understanding. When they defeat an enemy, they do not simply claim victory. They erase them. They burn their cities. They salt their fields so nothing will ever grow again. They remember grudges for generations. Great-grandchildren will kill for insults given to great-grandparents. Malloys laughed. So they are savages. This makes them less of a threat, not more. You do not understand. Sarethi was almost pleading now. They do this to their own kind. To creatures who share their blood, their language, their world. Imagine what they would do to us. To aliens who attacked without warning. To enemies who threatened their children. The War Council fell silent. Some of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Malloys was not moved. He had conquered 63 systems. He had broken species far older and more powerful than humanity. He would not be frightened by stories of a primitive race barely out of its cradle. The Conclave has grown old and cowardly, he said. They see threats everywhere because they have forgotten what it means to be strong. The Vraxian Dominion does not hide from lesser species. We do not quarantine them and hope they go away. We conquer them. He turned to his admirals. Prepare the invasion fleet. 3,000 ships. We will strike their outer colonies first. We will kill enough to break their spirit, and then they will surrender. This war will be over before it truly begins. Sarethi tried one more time. My sovereign, I beg you, read the archive entries. The Valkyrie have been watching them for centuries. Every observation ends with the same warning. Do not provoke them. Do not threaten their homes. Do not. Enough. Malloy silenced her with a gesture. You are relieved of your advisory position. Return to your diplomatic vessel and stay out of my way. Sarethi bowed her head in defeat. She had done everything she could. She had given every warning she knew how to give. Now all she could do was watch. As she left the council chamber, she sent a private message to the Valkyrie archivists. It contained only 3 words. They will attack. Across the galaxy, in the great library of the Crimson Archive, Old Thesson received the message. He closed his ancient eyes and began to write what he knew would be the final entry in Earth's file. The warnings were given, he wrote. They were not heeded. What comes next will change the galaxy forever. May the cosmos forgive us all for what we failed to prevent. In the cold void between stars, 3,000 Vraxian warships began their journey toward human space. They carried enough firepower to burn worlds. They carried soldiers eager for conquest. They carried the absolute certainty that victory would be swift and total. They had no idea what they were about to awaken. The Vraxians chose their moment with cruel precision. Humans had a holiday called Christmas. It was a time when families gathered together. Children opened gifts. People sang songs and shared meals. Soldiers went home to be with loved ones. Defense stations operated with smaller crews. The whole species seemed to pause and breathe. High Sovereign Malloys had learned about this holiday from captured communications. He saw it as the perfect weakness to exploit. Strike when they are happy, he reasoned. Strike when they feel safe. The shock will break them. 3,000 Vraxian warships folded space and appeared above 12 human colony worlds simultaneously. There was no warning, no declaration of war. One moment the skies were peaceful, and the next they were filled with fire. Harvest Prime was the largest target. It was an agricultural world, home to 16 million humans. They grew food for a dozen other colonies. Families had lived there for generations, farming the rich soil under an orange sun. General Kethful commanded the assault on Harvest Prime. He had received specific orders from Maldois. Make an example. Show the humans what happens to those who resist the Dominion. Show them that mercy is not available. The Vraxian ships opened fire on the cities first. Plasma rained from the sky like burning tears. Buildings that had stood for a century collapsed in seconds. Streets where children had played became rivers of flame. But the ships were only the beginning. Vraxian ground troops landed by the thousands. They marched through the burning ruins with orders to kill everything that moved. They did not distinguish between soldiers and civilians. They did not spare the young or the old. They simply killed Dot by the 6th hour. The capital city was ash. By the 12th hour, the death toll had passed 8 million Dot, and through it all, the Vraxians broadcast everything. Every human world with a receiver watched in real time as Harvest Prime died. They saw the burning hospitals. They saw families running through the streets, cut down by plasma fire. They saw children crying over the bodies of their parents. They saw old men and women trying to surrender, only to be executed where they stood. High Sovereign Maldois appeared in the broadcast. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, his metallic skin gleaming, his forearms spread wide in triumph. "Humans," he said, his voice translated into every human language. "Your age is ending. What you see is just the beginning. Surrender your remaining worlds, and we will grant you a quick death. Resist, and every one of your colonies will become another Harvest Prime. Every man, woman, and child will know this suffering." He smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "You have 1 day to respond." The broadcast ended. Across human space, 16 billion people sat in stunned silence. On Earth, the center of human civilization, the government scrambled to respond. The United Earth Parliament was a slow organization, designed for peace and diplomacy. It was not built for this kind of crisis. Representatives shouted at each other. Military commanders demanded immediate action. Diplomats called for negotiations, and then something strange happened. The communications networks went quiet. For 17 minutes, no official signal left Earth. No military orders were issued. No diplomatic messages were sent. The Vraxians, monitoring human frequencies, interpreted this as shock. The paralysis of a species confronting its own extinction. Admiral Serethi, watching from her diplomatic vessel far from the battle zone, knew better. She had studied humans. She understood what silence meant. It was not paralysis. It was focused. In those 17 minutes, something that had never happened in human history took place. Every nation, every faction, every political party stopped fighting with each other. Old grudges were set aside. Ancient conflicts were forgotten. Borders that humans had killed each other over for centuries suddenly meant nothing. The United Earth Parliament voted to dissolve itself. Not in chaos, but in unity. All power was transferred to a single emergency body, the Terran War Council. Every human military force, from the smallest planetary militia to the great Earth fleet, was placed under unified command. 16 billion humans, scattered across 40 worlds, became one. When the 17 minutes ended, humanity sent its response. It was not a message of surrender. It was not a plea for mercy. It was not even a declaration of war. It was a single sentence, transmitted on every frequency, in every language, to every corner of the galaxy. "You should not have touched our children." Admiral Serethi read the message and immediately began transmitting her resignation to the Vraxian Dominion. She set a course for neutral space, pushing her ship's engines to their limit. She wanted to be as far away as possible from what was coming. General Kethful, still on the surface of Harvest Prime, received the human response. He laughed and shared it with his officers. They all laughed. One sentence? This was their answer? Surely they understood how badly they were outnumbered. Surely they knew they could not win. Kethful ordered his communications officer to send a mocking reply. But before the message could be sent, something happened that none of them expected. Every system on every Vraxian ship in human space shut down simultaneously. It lasted only 3 seconds. Power flickered off and on. Screens went dark and relit. Weapons systems rebooted. In the chaos, no one could determine what had happened. What they did not know was that human infiltrators had been planting dormant programs in Vraxian networks for months. Not enough to cause permanent damage. Just enough to send a message. We are already inside your systems. We know your weaknesses. This war will not be fought on your terms. On Vraxis Prime, the hidden homeworld of the Dominion, High Sovereign Malthois received reports of the system glitch. He dismissed it as a minor malfunction. His attention was focused on the human response. One sentence. They sent one sentence. He did not understand what it meant. He could not understand. The Vraxians had never faced a species like humanity. They had never encountered creatures who could unify so completely, so quickly, in the face of extinction. They had never fought an enemy who considered mercy a choice rather than a weakness. In the great archive of the Velkari, Old Thiessen watched the human broadcast and felt something he had not experienced in 10,000 years. Fear. Not fear of humanity. Fear for the galaxy. He began updating the Crimson Archive with new entries. Classification levels were raised. Warning signals were strengthened. Every species in the Conclave needed to understand what was about to happen. The Vraxians have awakened something that should have been left sleeping, he wrote. The Cosmos gave them every warning. They ignored them all. Now they will learn why those warnings existed. He paused, his ancient hands trembling over the keyboard. May the stars forgive them, because humanity will not. Across human space, the War Council began issuing orders. Ships that had been scattered moved toward rally points. Factories that had produced consumer goods switched to military production. Scientists who had studied peaceful applications of physics began designing weapons. And in hidden shipyards buried deep in asteroid fields and gas giant moons, something stirred. Something the galaxy did not know existed. Something humanity had been building in secret for 300 years. The Vraxians wanted war. They would get more than they ever imagined. The Galactic Conclave called an emergency session. Representatives from 4,000 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, a structure so vast that clouds formed near its ceiling. They had come to discuss the war between humanity and the Vraxian Dominion. More importantly, they had come to stop it. The ancient species of the Conclave believed in rules. War had rules. Conflict had limits. When one civilization attacked another, there were proper responses, measured responses, proportional responses. You did not burn the galaxy over a single battle, no matter how terrible. They summoned the human ambassador to speak before them. Her name was Wei Chen. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 1.5 meters tall. Her black hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes held a calm that seemed out of place for someone whose species had just suffered a massacre. She walked to the center of the assembly floor. Around her, thousands of alien representatives watched from their seats. The Vraxian delegation sat in a prominent position, their metallic bodies gleaming under the lights. The conclave speaker, a massive creature that resembled a floating jellyfish, began the proceedings. Ambassador Chun, the speaker said, its voice echoing through the chamber. The conclave recognizes the tragedy that has befallen your people. The attack on your colonies was unprovoked and brutal. We offer our condolences. Wei Chun said nothing. She simply waited. However, the speaker continued. The conclave urges restraint. We ask that humanity pursue diplomatic resolution. We ask that any military response be proportional to the offense. The rules of civilized warfare demand proportional response, Wei-chan interrupted. Her voice was soft but clear. It carried to every corner of the massive chamber. The speaker paused. Interrupting a conclave proceeding was considered extremely rude. But something in the human's tone made the ancient creature hesitate. You wish us to respond proportionally, Wei-chan continued, to the murder of 8 million of our people, to the broadcast execution of our children, to an attack launched during a holiday celebrating peace and family. She began walking slowly across the floor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Tell me, honored representatives, what would a proportional response look like? Should we kill 8 million Vraxians and call it even? Should we broadcast their deaths for the galaxy to see? Should we strike their worlds during their celebrations? She stopped and looked directly at the Vraxian delegation. Several of them shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. The Vraxians have made their intentions clear, she said. They do not want our surrender. They want our extinction. They said so in their broadcast. Every man, woman, and child. Those were the words of High Sovereign Maldois. Wei-chan turned back to the conclave. When she smiled, it was not a friendly expression. Several ancient delegates later reported feeling something they had never experienced before. Their translators struggled to find the right word. The closest approximation was dread. We did not choose this war, she said, but we will finish it. And no, honored delegates, we will not be proportional. She let the word hang in the air. We will be thorough. The conclave erupted in protest. Delegates shouted about treaties, about precedents, about the danger of unrestricted warfare. The Vraxian representatives demanded that the conclave intervene, that they send peacekeeping forces to stop the human aggression. But it was already too late. While Ambassador Chun spoke to the conclave, the human war machine began to move. The galaxy expected a frontal assault. Massed fleets clashing in the void. Epic battles between great warships. What they got was completely different. Thousands of small human vessels scattered into Vraxian space. They were tiny things, no larger than shuttles. Some carried only 2 or 3 crew members. The Vraxian admirals detected them and laughed. What could such insignificant craft possibly accomplish? These ships carried no weapons. They carried humans with very specific skills. Engineers who understood Vraxian technology. Hackers who could crack any security system. Saboteurs who knew how to break things in ways that could not be easily fixed. They infiltrated supply lines. They corrupted manufacturing databases. They planted hidden programs in communication networks. They found the weaknesses in Vraxian infrastructure and quietly made them worse. But that was only the first wave. The second wave emerged from places the galaxy never knew existed. For 300 years, humanity had been secretly building ships. Not in their visible shipyards, where conclave observers could monitor them. They built them in hidden facilities carved into asteroids, in stations hidden in the clouds of gas giants, in underground factories on moons nobody visited. When the human fleet finally revealed itself, the Vraxians were stunned. They had expected hundreds of ships, perhaps 1,000 at most. Instead, they faced tens of thousands. Worse still, these were not the ships Vraxian intelligence had predicted. Human technology was supposed to be a century behind the Dominion. Their weapons should have been inferior. Their shields should have been weaker. Instead, the human ships carried weapons that bypassed Vraxian shields entirely. Their engines were faster than anything the Dominion possessed. Their targeting systems never seemed to miss. The humans had been hiding their true capabilities. For centuries, they had shown the galaxy only a fraction of their technology. They had watched. They had learned. They had prepared Dodd, and now they were using everything they had built. The first. Major battle occurred at Keth Prime, a fortress world deep in Vraxian territory. The Dominion had stationed 100,000 ships there. It was considered impregnable. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Vraxian fleet was scattered debris. The orbital defense platforms were slag. Human ground forces had captured the planetary capital in a single afternoon. But it was what happened next that truly terrified the galaxy. The humans did not execute their prisoners. They did not burn the cities. They did not murder civilians in revenge for Harvest Prime. Instead, they sent a simple message to every Vraxian frequency. Surrender offered once, declined, and then they moved to the next system. The pattern repeated across Vraxian space. Overwhelming force, followed by offers of surrender, followed by continued advance when those offers were refused. The humans did not torture. They did not commit atrocities. They simply kept coming. Keth Prime fell, then Valor Station, then the industrial centers of the Outer Reach. One by one, the fortress worlds of the Dominion crumbled. High Sovereign Malloys could not understand it. His people were warriors. They had conquered dozens of species. They had never faced an enemy like this. The humans fought without pause. They fought without rest. They seemed to need nothing but victory. When one ship was destroyed, 2 more appeared to take its place. When one soldier fell, 10 more rose behind them. That an ancient Velkari phrase began circulating through the conclave. Persistence hunters. The humans had evolved not as ambush predators, not as trappers, not as creatures that relied on single overwhelming strikes. They had evolved as creatures that simply never stopped following their prey. The Vraxians were about to learn what that meant. In 12,000 years of conquest, the Vraxian Dominion had never retreated. They had faced older empires and shattered them. They had encountered species with superior technology and outlasted them. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. But they had always found a way to win. Within 18 months of the war's beginning, they had lost half their territory. High Sovereign Malloys addressed his people through every broadcast channel. He stood tall on his flagship, his forearms raised in defiance. He spoke of Vraxian strength. He spoke of their glorious history. He spoke of the certainty of ultimate victory. The humans are small, he declared. Their population numbers only in the tens of billions. Ours numbers in the trillions. They cannot sustain this offensive. They will exhaust themselves. They will run out of ships, out of soldiers, out of will. We need only endure. The mathematics seemed to support him. For every human who died, the Vraxians could afford to lose 100. Time was on their side. But Malloys did not understand humans. He did not grasp what centuries of observation had taught the Valkari. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not calculate acceptable losses. They did not weigh lives against territory. When humans fought, they fought with everything they had. And they did not stop until one side was completely destroyed. The first sign that something was wrong came from the rear lines. Vraxian supply convoys began disappearing. Not in battle, but in the quiet spaces between systems. Ships that should have arrived never came. Cargo vessels sent distress signals and then went silent. Investigation teams found only debris and empty void. Human infiltrators had been busy. Those tiny ships that had scattered into Vraxian space at the war's beginning were still there. They had been there for months, hiding in asteroid fields and the shadows of gas giants. They watched supply routes. They mapped patrol schedules. They waited for perfect moments, and then they struck. Not with massive fleet battles. Not with heroic last stands. They struck with bombs planted in cargo holds. With navigation systems quietly reprogrammed to send ships into stars. With rumors spread through channels about traitors in the high command. The Vraxian military began to fracture from within. Commanders stopped trusting each other. Every system failure was suspected sabotage. Every unexplained death was potential assassination. Officers who had served together for centuries began watching each other with suspicion. The humans had a word for this kind of warfare. They called it psychological warfare, breaking the enemy's mind before breaking their body. Rumors spread through Vraxian ranks like disease. The humans could not be killed, some said. They had made pacts with beings from between dimensions. They could read minds. They could walk through walls. They never slept. They never tired. They never forgot. None of it was true. But the fear was real. On the front lines, human ships continued their advance. They did not hurry. They did not need to. Each system they conquered gave them more resources. Each factory they captured produced more ships. Each victory brought more Vraxians to their side. Yes, Vraxians. As the war dragged on, something unprecedented happened. Vraxian citizens began surrendering without fighting. Some even switched sides entirely. They had seen how humans treated prisoners. They had heard about the worlds humanity had conquered. No massacres. No revenge killings. No burning of cities. The humans simply disarmed the population, installed temporary governments, and moved on. Compare that to what High Sovereign Maldois had done to Harvest Prime. Compare that to the broadcast of burning children and dying families. The humans are monsters. Maldois insisted in his broadcasts. But his people had eyes. They could see which side was acting like monsters. 2 years into the war, the first Vraxian system surrendered before human ships even arrived. Then another. Then a dozen more. Maldois ordered the execution of traitors. He broadcast the deaths to remind his people of the cost of disloyalty. But this only accelerated the collapse. More systems saw the executions and decided they would rather take their chances with humans than with their own government. The Vraxian Dominion was falling apart. Not because it was being conquered, because its own people were giving up. And then came the revelation that ended everything. Human intelligence had located Vraxis Prime. The Vraxian homeworld was the most closely guarded secret in the Dominion. Its location was known only to the highest levels of government. Even most admirals did not know where it was. The Conclave had searched for it for millennia without success. The humans found it in 18 months. They did not attack. Not yet. Instead, they let the information leak. They ensured that every Vraxian citizen knew that humanity could reach their homeworld whenever they chose. The message was clear. There is nowhere you can hide. Maldois felt true fear for the first time in 800 years. He looked at the map showing human positions. They were everywhere. His fleets were scattered, demoralized, running out of supplies. His admirals were sending desperate reports about declining morale. His own people were turning against him. And now the humans knew where his home was. A single human ship folded space into the Vraxis system. It was small, unarmed. A diplomatic vessel. Ambassador Wei Chun's face appeared on every Vraxian screen. "High Sovereign Maldois," she said. "We can end your species. We have the capability. After what you did to our children, we have the desire. Every human who saw the broadcast of Harvest Prime would celebrate your extinction." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But we are giving you one opportunity. One. Unconditional surrender. Full accountability for war crimes. Reparations for every life you took." Maldois stared at her image with hatred burning in his eyes. His fleet was broken. His empire was crumbling. His people were in open revolt. But still, he could not understand. Why? He asked. His voice was broadcast to his entire species. "You could destroy us. You have the power. Why offer mercy?" Wei Chun's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened slightly. Because we are not you, she said. We will never become you. We are humanity. We are capable of great cruelty. We have proven that to ourselves many times throughout our history. But we also have the ability to choose restraint when restraint is possible. She leaned closer to the camera. Today, restraint is still possible. Your species can survive. Your worlds can remain standing. Your children can grow up in peace. But this offer will not last forever. Refuse, and the fleet behind me will reduce Raxus Prime to ash. Every world still loyal to you will follow. The silence stretched across the stars. You wanted to know why we fight so hard, Wei Chung continued. You wanted to understand what drives us. It is simple. Those were our people on Harvest Prime, our families, our children. When you touch one human, you face all of us. This is not strategy. This is not policy. This is what we are. She straightened. Decide. Malloys looked at the screens showing his broken empire. He looked at the reports of systems surrendering. He looked at the fuel and ammunition counts that could not sustain another month of war. For the first time in his 800-year life, he had been truly defeated. Not just militarily, not just politically. He had been defeated by a species that could have destroyed him but chose not to. And that, somehow, was worse than any military loss could have been. He closed his eyes. We surrender. The Vraxian Dominion surrendered unconditionally on a date that humans called May 8th, 2849. The number meant nothing to most species in the galaxy. But to humans, that date carried weight. Many centuries ago, on their homeworld, wars had ended on that date. It was a day of remembrance. A day of victory over terrible enemies. Now, it marked another ending. The surrender terms were harsh, but not genocidal. The Dominion was dissolved. Each Vraxian world was granted independence under conclave supervision. They would govern themselves, but they would never again unite under a single military command. High Sovereign Nalois was arrested. Along with 17 of his senior commanders, he was transported to a neutral station for trial. For the first time in galactic history, war crimes trials were conducted under human legal frameworks. The concept puzzled many species. War was war. The victors did what they wished. There had never been rules about treatment of defeated enemies. There had never been consequences for brutality. Humans explained it differently. Actions have consequences, Ambassador Wei Chun said during the opening of the trials. Power does not grant immunity. When you order the deaths of millions, you do not get to hide behind ranks or titles. You answer for what you have done. Malloys and his commanders were tried openly. Evidence was presented. Recordings from Harvest Prime were shown. Survivors testified about what they had witnessed. The entire galaxy watched. Malloys was found guilty of crimes against humanity. Not against a single species, but against the basic dignity of intelligent life. He and 12 of his commanders were sentenced to imprisonment for the remainder of their natural lives. Some humans wanted executions. They wanted blood for blood. They wanted the Vraxians to suffer as their families had suffered on Harvest Prime. But the War Council chose differently. We could have killed them all, a human admiral said during the sentencing. We still could, but that would make us what they are. It would prove that strength and cruelty are the same thing. We choose to prove otherwise. The convicted commanders were taken to a prison facility on a remote moon. They would live out their long lives in isolation, watching the galaxy they had tried to conquer continue without them. It was, perhaps, a worse fate than death. On Harvest Prime, the humans built a memorial. It was a simple structure, a great wall of polished black stone stretching across the plain where the capital city had once stood. Carved into its surface were names. 8 million names. Every man, woman, and child who had died in the attack. People came from across human space to visit. They stood before the wall in silence. They touched the names of people they had known. They wept out and they remembered. The war had cost humanity dearly. Nearly 3 million soldiers had died in the fighting. A dozen colony worlds had been damaged. The economic cost would take decades to recover, but something else had changed. Something that could not be measured in numbers. Humanity had discovered what it could do when it united. The petty conflicts that had divided them for centuries seemed smaller now. The differences that had once seemed so important had faded in the face of extinction. They had been tested. They had survived. They had remained human throughout. Within a decade of the war's end, human space had grown to 70 worlds. Within 2 decades, to 100. Their ships traveled farther than ever before. Their scientists made breakthroughs that advanced technology by centuries. Their artists created works that moved species across the galaxy. And no one challenged them. The Conclave watched humanity's expansion with careful attention. Some of the ancient species worried. Such rapid growth had always led to conflict in the past. Empires that expanded too quickly became threats to their neighbors, but humanity was different. They traded with their neighbors instead of conquering them. They shared technology instead of hoarding it. They offered alliance instead of subjugation. They had proven they could destroy. Now they were proving they could build. The Valkyrie, ancient keepers of the Crimson Archive, updated their records one final time. Old Payson himself wrote the entry, despite his failing health. He wanted to ensure the words were exactly right. Classification. Apex threat, do not engage, he wrote. The species called humanity has demonstrated capabilities previously believed theoretical. Their technology exceeds Conclave estimates by approximately 400 years. Their population, while small, displays unprecedented unity under threat. Their psychology includes traits unknown in other galactic species: persistence, hunting instinct, spite-based motivation, and what they call righteous fury. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Most critically, they practice restraint not from weakness, but from choice. The Vraxian Dominion was permitted to survive because humanity decided to permit it. This decision could be reversed at any time. He continued writing. Recommendation: maintain peaceful relations. Do not threaten human civilians. Do not harm human children. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness. Do not mistake their patience for fear. The cosmos gave signs. The Vraxians ignored them. Let no species make this error again. Thiessen sealed the file and leaned back. His work was done. He had watched humanity since before they left their birth world. He had seen them at their worst and their best. He understood them better than perhaps any alien in the galaxy. They were terrifying. They were beautiful. They were a contradiction made flesh, and they were exactly what the galaxy needed. Centuries passed. Young species joined the Conclave. They looked at the human territories on their star maps and wondered why such a relatively small power was treated with such deference. Why did ancient empires bow to them? Why did the great powers of the galaxy speak of humanity in hushed tones? The elders would take these young ones aside. They would show them 2 recordings. The first was the Vraxian broadcast from Harvest Prime, the burning cities, the dying children, the boasting of high sovereign Malloys. The second was the human response. Not the words themselves, but the 17 minutes of silence that preceded them. Listen, the elders would say. Listen carefully to that silence. That is not shock. That is not fear. That is not a species paralyzed by grief. That is the sound of 16 billion individuals becoming one. That is humanity deciding. Together, that mercy was no longer required. The young ones would listen. They would understand. And they would update their own records, never provoke humanity. On Earth, life continued. Children were born. Families gathered for holidays. People argued about politics and art and the meaning of existence. They were not so different from any other species in the galaxy, but there was a memorial in every city. A small one, often overlooked by those rushing past. Just a simple stone with a simple message. Harvest Prime. Never forget. Never again. And every human who passed those memorials knew what they meant. They knew what their species had done. They knew what their species had become when pushed too far. They carried that knowledge with them, always. It was a burden. But it was also a promise. Never again would they be caught unprepared. Never again would they be weak when strength was needed. Never again would they watch their children die while enemies laughed. And never again would they become the monsters they had fought. The cosmos remained at peace. Not because humanity enforced it. Not because they threatened it. But because every species in the galaxy had learned the same lesson. Some creatures should not be awakened. Some warnings should not be ignored. Some silences contain more than words ever could. The cosmos had given signs. The Vraxians had ignored them. And the galaxy would never forget what happened next.